I think I was always had an interest in creative endeavors. Like growing up, I was always interested in either athletics and or like drawing or painting. And so I kind of pursued some of those interests in high school years. But going into college, I never actually thought I could make a living off of it. And so I actually went to liberal arts school in at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and just pursued kind of more general like philosophy, writing, language arts, just trying to figure out really what I wanted to do. And I was still taking art classes during that time, and I really had this passion for art. And I had a teacher who was really influential who told me, if you're really interested in art, you should be going to art school. And so I actually just completely listened to him, dropped out of school, moved back to San Francisco, and enrolled in the Academy of Art in San Francisco, and pursued mostly like fine art and traditional arts, a lot of like charcoal drawings and a lot of oil painting. But I quickly realized, like in class, there were a lot of people who were potentially like a little bit more talented, and so I decided, oh shit, I need to make a living off of this eventually. And I'd also been into film growing up, and so I decided, well, maybe I should take some digital art classes and see if that interests me. And so I started going down that road, and I got super into compositing and design, and started to pursue that. And then I eventually, got out of school with a BA in animation, and got my first job at an advertising agency in San Francisco called Goodby Silverstein and Partners. And I started working in their in-house motion department, doing like a lot of just like creative development and animation and like logo end tags. Not very like amazing type of work, just like pretty like low budget type stuff. And that's actually where I ended up meeting Chris for the first time. So yeah, so that's kind of like how I got started. So I think we worked at Goodby for 3 years together. And then our creative director at the time actually left to form a new production company, Autofuss. And so we had been doing a lot of personal projects that were gaining some attention, and he saw that we had like a real passion for motion design. And so he asked us if we wanted to come along and help him start the studio. And that's pretty much like how Autofuss was born. And so Oddfellow was, a production company in San Francisco, and we worked there for the next 3 years together. And eventually, they had started out doing more design and animation type work, but eventually they moved a little bit more into technology and robotics and motion control. So, before, like when it first got started, we were doing a lot of design and animation, and later on, as they shifted to technology, we were doing like welding one day, design another day, like electrical work a different day, and painting robots and like doing camera moves. And so I think we had always had this deep love of design and animation. So as the company kind of shifted focus, we decided that it was time to make the jump to freelance and do our own work. And so those were kind of like the drifter years after Autofuss, just freelancing and taking on projects at ad agencies around San Francisco. But we quickly realized that the type of work that we wanted to do, it didn't really exist in San Francisco. It was being made in LA and New York. But we loved San Francisco. We didn't want to move. And so, at the same time, we were also, over the course of our career, we had kind of built up a list of contacts, right? And so clients were reaching out to us directly and asking us if we would take on projects for them. And so we would take on the work. And while it wasn't as glamorous as the stuff we were working on at Autofuss, it was, in a lot of ways, like really creatively satisfying, just because we were dealing with the entire project from start to finish. And so this kind of work snowballed, and we started doing more of it. And eventually, that's how we decided to start Oddfellows. I think we'll stop for a while. I don't think we have ambitions of like becoming like a massive studio. I think we like kind of being a little bit smaller. The reason we've grown, so quickly is because previously we had been working with a lot of freelance talent, and the work has increased over the years. And so we had this desire to create like a team, that would work on every single project and learn and grow from each other. And so that's kind of why we've ramped up so much this year. So Chris used to live in San Francisco, and our other partner, TJ, also used to live in San Francisco. And I think, the gist behind it is that San Francisco is extremely expensive city to live in. And TJ had wanted to move somewhere a little less expensive and also a little bit more rural, kind of outside of a city. And Chris just had like his second child. And so he was also interested in, having a backyard and having a bigger place to live and being able to walk around and having it be a little bit more kid friendly. And at the same time, we were trying to hire 3 people. We were trying to hire Jay Quershaw, Jordan Scott, and Kayvon Mosgoody. And they were all living in New York at the time. And, we threw out this idea of coming to San Francisco, and they weren't really interested in that. But the idea of Portland actually kind of like piqued their interest. And so it's kind of the culmination of sort of all these events, coming together to be like, oh, shit, maybe we should open up a studio in Portland. And so that's what we did. Well, it's like different than San Francisco. I think it depends on like what you're looking for, whether you determine whether it's like good or not, right? It's flat, it's more family friendly, it's cheaper to live, it's closer to kind of like an outdoor recreational type environment. And so I think there's a lot of artists, working in the city, in LA and New York, obviously, like they're these big cities, right? But there's not that many motion studios kind of in these smaller, more rural towns. And so the cool thing about having a studio both in the city in San Francisco and somewhere a little further out there in Portland is that as an artist, we're giving people the option to kind of choose where they want to be. Mostly it's technology companies actually, mostly because of where we're located in San Francisco. So people reaching out for commercials to explain a product that they have or a feature that they're releasing. We do a lot of work with Google and with Twitter, just kind of like helping them to tell little micro stories that are happening in their company. And so that's kind of the lion's share of the work. More recently this year, we're starting to getting like contacted by sort of other types of clients, and we're excited about that. Like we just did a giant job with Cartoon Network, which has been super exciting. And then we also just did a project with Refinery 29 out of New York. That was more of like a fashion-oriented project. And so I think we're interested in kind of like branching out and having a range of clients. Like previously to this year, it's been a lot of technology-focused stuff. And we like doing that work, but it's also nice to kind of get to like stretch our wings and put our hands in different territories. That's funny, like we never get contacted for that type of work. I think mostly because our work is so graphic most of the time, and title sequences tend to be like a little bit more on like the live action side. But I think that's something we're definitely interested in too, is like branching out and kind of exploring like new mediums. We actually like did that in partnership with a director out of San Francisco, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, and so that was a documentary that she was putting together, and she was looking around for a partner to do all the graphics for it, and we were interested in the cause. It sounded like a great thing to get involved in, and we've always wanted to do some documentary work, and so kind of jumped at the chance to take it on. That's hard. And I think like in a lot of ways like I said, we started the year with like 5 people and now we're 13. And so I think Chris and I have to do a lot more management than we did before. And so in a lot of ways, we're still figuring it out. I think the important thing for us is, in previous companies, maybe we didn't have as much of a voice in the company as we wanted to. And so it's giving people the opportunity to feel like they're helping to guide the company. And so I like to manage as little as possible, if so, but sometimes I have to step in. I like to like plant a seed of an idea, and then we have a lot of talented people, and they'll help it to grow and turn it into something bigger. It's getting a little easier because now I think we're getting a little bit more well known as a studio, and so people are actually like reaching out to us and like sending emails and asking if they can work for us. But most of the time, how it happens is just sending like people emails and saying, hey, like we like your work, let's collaborate and let's try to make something together. And so we'll usually do a freelance project with people who we've always wanted to work with, right? And if that goes well and we enjoy the process, because it's not just about getting like a super talented person involved to make the work. I think we also really want to enjoy the process of making the work. So if they fit in well, not just from like a design superstar perspective, but also as like a nice person that you'd want to hang out with, and we enjoy the process, then we'll maybe potentially ask them to come join the team. I think it depends on the project, but I think generally I feel like we're always sort of tweaking our approach. I think one thing we're doing differently now is I think we're trying to put more time up front for creative development, really trying to come up with a solid plan before we move into animation. Um, just because, like we've had projects before where we've rushed the design phase, and so like things weren't as thought out as they should have been before we got into animation, and which causes a lot of problems, right? And so we try to put a lot of time up front to really think through ideas and make sure from a storytelling perspective things are really solid, and from a design perspective we have a good plan, and to really try to like think through transitions before we actually just dive into animation. God, I feel like it's easy to get inspiration these days. There's so many talented people out there making amazing work. So, I mean, I check Vimeo daily, and I'm religious about Pinterest and pinning ideas and kind of like trying to generate just ideas through those sources. But it's also hard too because coming up with ideas, you don't just want to copy someone, right? But the goal there is just to kind of be inspired, I guess, and feel the desire to make something great, right? And so I think just like going through Vimeo and looking at respective artists and seeing what people are doing is probably the best way to do it. We experiment as a studio. Like these days, I have very little time to do any personal work for myself. The studio just takes up so much of my time, right? And so, yeah, I think eventually it's a nice thought that I could get back to that at some point. But for now, I think, when we're thinking about personal projects, we're really thinking about, making it together as a studio. And I've also seen the power of, collaborating with everyone in the studio. Oftentimes, will make something a lot greater than, if it was just me kind of like working on it all by myself. And so after seeing like that process unfolding, I get excited about making stuff with everyone. Generally, like on a project, we'll try to get a week of like storyboard time. So just trying to like map out a story and like trying to evolve the idea and kind of like seeing what we can do purely from a storyboard perspective. So not thinking about design at all. And so once we do that and we're feeling good about the story, we usually try to have like maybe 2 to 3 weeks of just design phase, right? And so like hopefully the first week is playing with styles, and we have something like an idea in our mind of how it should look like, but oftentimes where we start is very different than where we end up, right? And so that allows us some time to make mistakes, which I think is really important in the creative process. So often like budgets demand this really short, condensed timeline, and it doesn't afford you to make a mistake, which is really bad because I think making something great is all about making mistakes and making it better over the course of the project. And so, yeah, so 3 weeks of design, and then usually we'll have, depending on the project, maybe 3 to 4 weeks of animation behind that. Yeah, I feel like I have had mentors, yeah. So I think maybe the biggest one was Randy Stoll. So he was our creative director at Goodby Silverstein and Partners, and I was coming into that situation, coming from a more technical kind of art school, and so I knew how to use the programs really well, but I didn't know much about telling a good story, and so he kind of taught me that the concept for what you're making, like the story behind it, is really the most important part. Because you can make something that's really well put together, but if there's not like a compelling story behind it, it's just kind of a miss, right? And so, but on the flip side, you can have a great story, and it can look terrible, and it still like resonates with people, right? And so I think I really learned that from him. So he was a great mentor, kind of along the way. Yeah. And I think in points of time, I've liked most of the jobs that I've had as an animator, for different reasons. I think at Goodby, I loved the job there just because the culture and the people were so amazing. I was really learning about the concept of things. At Autofuss, it was very different. I was learning more kind of like hands-on practical knowledge of how to make finished work and how to make it great, and the time and effort and the blood, sweat, and tears that you have to put into something to make it really amazing. And so I think during that time, I loved that job for that reason. And at Oddfellows, I loved the job just because at first it was me and Chris, and we were doing kind of everything. And now that we have more people, I love just seeing kind of like what they bring to it, and how much better the work and the studio is because of them. Oh, motion design. So I think it's just it's kind of what it seems, it's design that's put into motion, right? And so that can sort of unfold in a variety of different ways. It can be more like a typography centric piece, or it can be more of a graphic kind of film. And so it's just creating basically a story out of some design. It's not something I actually like think of that often. There are trends, like a lot of like bouncing animation, and right now it's pretty saturated with more like 2D type of work, right? But trends kind of come and go, and I think what makes you stand out is just telling like compelling stories, and finding your own voice, and trying to find your own style, right? And doing the things that you like to do, not just trying to copy other people. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of like what's next, right? Like I think recently there's been this huge reemergence of cell animation, which that's a trend that I'm actually really happy that's kind of come about, because I think it's pretty amazing. You can really see the hand of the artist in cell animation in a way that you sometimes don't get from something like After Effects, and so hopefully that one's here to stay for a while. It's way less time. Yeah, yeah, and that's something that's like was hard to let go of initially, because you start a company, you're so attached to the work that you're making, and I love making work. I love sitting in front of the computer and putting my headphones on, and just don't bother me for like 8 hours. I'm just gonna like animate, but I just don't have that luxury anymore. There's the higher level stuff with the company that needs to be run. Somebody has to do it. So I think hopefully we'll stay, small. I think there's still some room to grow. But I think hopefully the work that we're doing is a little bit more diverse. I think we love doing advertising and more commercially based stuff, but I think we really started the company because we wanted to kind of tell stories, and express ourselves, and make people feel something from the work that we're putting out. And so I think we're excited about doing more narrative work, just telling a story for story's sake, and doing some more short films. And then I think we're also interested in pushing into some new mediums as well. So whether that's doing stuff for more mobile stuff like a game, or an app or an experience, or even doing more like tactile art, like art installations, and just kind of like exploring our creativity in different ways, just to keep it interesting. So I think we'd just like to like move into some of those territories a little bit. So we have a little bit of experience. We're certainly not experts by any means. The only project we've done with virtual reality is for a Google project, actually. So they have a device called the Cardboard, and so we made an intro for them for the device. They had a project where they partnered with the New York Times and gave out 10,000 free devices to people so they could experience VR for the first time. And it was interesting. It's a super interesting medium and very challenging if you don't know anything about it to try to like fabricate a story in it because everything you know about telling a story with motion design, it's completely different in virtual reality. Things that we thought would work like just fell flat on their faces, and things we thought would be total failures ended up being really compelling. Um, but yeah, I think we're super interested in that. We'd like to do more of it. From a technical aspect, it's also pretty challenging. We don't have that many people on staff who really know too much about it. Um, but yeah, I think we'd love to do more with it. I mean, I think I'm doing it in a lot of ways. Like, I think my dream job has always been to just communicate my feelings and have an avenue to feel like I'm being creative and expressing myself. And so I get to go to work and I get to come up with ideas and experience them with people I love and admire and get to fabricate these things. So I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. If I wasn't doing this, I think I'd either be maybe making music and or possibly cooking because I love to cook and I love to experiment with food. And so I think it would be like a creative endeavor in a different way. Music would be amazing because I feel like I don't know anyone that doesn't love music to some degree, right? And so I think universally it's a pretty amazing medium to connect with people, to make them feel. I'd actually like to do more like studio collaborations actually. 'Cause I think there's definitely like individual artists that we'd love to collaborate with, super talented. Um, but I think collaborating with actually like a team of artists would be pretty interesting. And so I think we'd love to collaborate with Giant Ant. Are you familiar with them? I have like a huge respect for those guys, and we've talked about working together in the past. And it's strange, to think about doing it because it seems like maybe like in a way we're like competitors. But I have a deep respect for those guys, and I know most of their individual team members, and they're all like super talents. And so to have access to kind of bounce ideas off of them and see what we could do as a studio together would be quite amazing, I feel like. I'd say like the only thing I would say is I think it's hard to be an individual artist, and to like doing personal projects, doing, concepting, storyboard, design, animation, sound, audio, dealing with all of it yourself. And I think for us as a studio, we've realized like how much better the work can get when you involve people who are experts at different parts of the process and getting them involved. And so I'd say to people, don't try to do it alone. Don't try to do everything alone. Reach out to people and try to collaborate because that's really the way to make like amazing work that's better than just what you could make by yourself.